Hello, thanks for tuning in to Upload Records Music News. I'm Johnny, filling in for Rockin' Ricky. And today, we're talking about something that's been on my mind ever since I came across a recent interview with Jonathan Cain, because there are a few things he said that kind of stick with you. Not in a loud, headline-grabbing way, but in that quieter, more revealing way, where you read between the lines and start to piece things together. Now, like most articles about Journey, this one starts the same way they all do. A history lesson, every single time. They go all the way back, talk about the early days, remind you how Cain joined during the Escape era, mention the 100 million records sold, as if the people reading this somehow don't already know. Let's be honest. Nobody just randomly stumbles into a Journey article in 2026 without already knowing exactly who they are. You're either a fan or you're not reading it. But still, they go through the motions. They mention albums like Escape, Frontiers, even the newer ones like Eclipse and Freedom. And then, buried in the middle of all that, you get to the real stuff, the part that actually matters. Because Jonathan Cain says something pretty direct. He says, the newer music doesn't move the needle. Think about that for a second. This isn't a critic saying it. This isn't a fan complaining online. This is someone inside the band. And when you hear something like that, it tells you a lot more than the rest of the article combined. He also says the only reason he's still out there is the fans, not the money. Now, maybe that's true. Maybe it is about the fans. But at the same time, you can't ignore everything else going on around that statement. Because when someone says that, it usually means there's something they're not saying. And then there's this line, "It's a beautiful time to say goodbye." That one stands out because it doesn't sound like someone gearing up for the next chapter. It sounds like someone closing a door. Jonathan Cain mentions that he's been with the band for 45 years. 45. That's not just a career, that's a lifetime. And he frames it like this might be the end of that chapter. But here's where things start to feel a little contradictory. Because right after saying all that, they're still touring, still out there, still playing multiple shows a week. And according to him, it's grueling. 4 two-hour shows a week. That's not nothing, especially at this stage. And if it's grueling for Jonathan Cain, you've got to think about Arnel Pineda, because he's the one carrying the vocals every night. That's a completely different level of pressure. And nobody in these interviews ever really talks about that. That's another thing that stands out, the questions that don't get asked. Because when you read these interviews, whether it's Jonathan Cain or Neil Schon, they stick to the same safe topics, the past, the hits, the fans. But what about everything that's happened over the last decade? The tensions, the disagreements, the behind-the-scenes issues that have popped up, gone viral, and then just disappeared. No follow-up. No real answers, just silence. And it makes you wonder, is that intentional? Because it feels like a lot of these interviews aren't really interviews anymore. They're access. If you ask the hard questions, you might not get invited back. So instead, you keep it light, you keep it safe, and you talk about things everyone already knows. Meanwhile, the real story stays just under the surface. Now, to be fair, you can't talk about Journey without giving credit where it's due. Because when Greg Rowley stepped away, he was the one who suggested bringing Jonathan Cain in. And that decision changed everything. You can't argue with the songwriting on Escape or Frontiers. Songs like Faithfully, that's Jonathan Cain's work. That's part of what built this band into what it became. But since then, it's fair to ask, has that same creative spark been there? Or has the band, like Cain himself hinted, started repeating itself? Because when even someone inside the group says the newer material isn't moving the needle, that's not just an opinion. That's an admission. And it lines up with what a lot of fans have quietly felt for years, that Journey today is more about maintaining the legacy than creating something new. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what this stage of their career is supposed to be. But then you circle back to that original statement again. It's a beautiful time to say goodbye. If that's really the case, then why keep pushing through a grueling tour? Why not step away on your own terms? Unless there are other factors at play, things we're not hearing about. And again, Nobody's asking. Nobody's digging into the relationship dynamics. Nobody's addressing the elephant in the room. And that's what makes these interviews feel incomplete, because the most interesting parts of the story are the parts that never get explored. Now, before wrapping this up, I want to shift gears for a second, because if you're someone who still loves that classic sound, that era of music, there are bands out there today still carrying that torch. There's one in particular called Boys from Heaven. Their album, The Wanderer, it really surprised me. It's got that same kind of feel, that melodic rock energy, the kind of sound you'd associate with bands like Journey, Foreigner, or Toto. But it still feels fresh, and sometimes that's what you're looking for. Something familiar, but not stuck in the past. So if you haven't checked them out, it's worth a listen. Now, as we close this out, I'll just say this. When you look at everything going on, the interviews, the comments, the tone, it really does feel like we're getting closer to the end of something. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but gradually, like a chapter quietly coming to a close. And whether that happens this year, next year, or a few years down the road, you can see the signs. They're there. You just have to look past the headlines and listen to what's actually being said. Thanks for watching and for sticking through all of this. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.